All rise, veuillez vous lever. The International Criminal Court is now in session. L'audience Cour Pénale International est ouverte. Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
Good morning, everyone. Court officer, could you call the case, please?
Good morning, Madam President. Good morning, Your Honors. This is the situation in the Republic of Mali in the case of the prosecutor versus Al Hassan Ag Abdulaziz Ag Mohammed Ag Mahmoud. Case reference ICC 0112 or 118. And for the record, we are in open session.
Thank you very much. If I could have the appearances, please. Mr. Deputy Prosecutor.
Bonjour, Madame.
Good morning, Madam President. Your Honours. The Office of the Prosecutor is represented today by myself, Deputy Prosecutor Manuel Nayang, and next to me, Jules de Théâtre, senior trial lawyer. Behind me, or next to me, Madame Diane Looping, and behind me, Mr. Lucio Garcia, Madame Marie-John Sadachi. We also have the trial lawyer Yamaguchi Musi Alafi, Sandra Schroeter, and then we also have the trial lawyer Paula Sacchi. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prosecutor. May I hear from the defense, please? Ms. Taylor.
Good morning, Madam President. Good morning, Your Honours. Good morning to our colleagues, the Deputy Prosecutor, and good morning to all our colleagues in and around the courtroom. The defence of Mr. Alassane is represented today by, to my left, we have Mr. Alka Pardon, Mr. Felicity Garikisi, Ms. Havnit Sethi, Mr. Melissa Bellier-Lucier, Ms. Yuqing Liu. Here we have Kelsey Bryan, Mr. Maulud Al-Ansari, Ms. Miriam Wright, Mr. Letta Matesi, Ms. Quinn Farr, and Ms. Claudia Barrera. Thank you very much.
Ms. Taylor, the legal representatives of the victims, please.
Bonjour, Madame.
Good morning, Your Honour, Presiding Judge, Your Honours. The team of the legal representatives of victims is composed of, at this hearing, on my right, Julie Goffin, and on the bench just behind, Bieke Lupacan Priska, Andres Morales, and the remainder of the team shall be participating in the hearing, but at a distance. We have on the screen, as is written, Seydou Doumbia, who will be speaking from Bamako, and our field assistant, Mr. Boubacar Maïga, and there is Maître Kassongo, who normally would also be at a distance, but it would seem that there are certain IT issues that need to be resolved, so we hope that by the time we are called to speak, that this problem will be resolved. And I hope that I have forgotten nobody. And of course, myself, Maître Fidel Sita Luvenjika.
Thank you very much, Counsel. Well, welcome to everyone here in the courtroom and as well joining us in the gallery or online. This is the hearing on sentencing under Article 76 of the statute. In this case, I note for the record, Mr. Alassane is also present. In light of the fact that there has been no live evidence requested, this hearing is limited to receiving oral submissions of the parties and participants on sentencing. The parties and participants have also filed written submissions on the 26th of August in advance of the hearing. And as the Chamber has indicated, after this hearing, no further submissions will be authorized. We have a schedule set with the 2 sessions of 1.5 hours this morning and a final session of 2 hours. And we're commencing with the normal timeframes applicable. So we'll be ending this session for a break at 11 a.m. And I am noting that the oral presentations have strict time constraints, and I'm expecting that those, of course, will be respected by the parties and the participants, and I will be vigilant in that respect. We'll begin with the prosecution, then the legal representatives of victims, and finally the defense. The chamber may then ask questions, and there will be an opportunity for any replies, subject to the chamber's authorization. As previously notified, 1 hour, 45 minutes, and everyone should be ready to commence as soon as the other has finished. The publicity, this is going to be an open hearing throughout, as is appropriate for these types of presentations. So therefore, without anything further, I give the floor to you, Mr. Deputy Prosecutor. You're, of course, free to distribute the presentations amongst the prosecution team as is appropriate. Thank you very much.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Your Honour, Your Honours, and thank you for this flexibility, and I will take advantage of it because the Jules du Théâtre, who has, with his team, led throughout this trial, he is certainly qualified to carry out these proceedings to its end, but with my presence, I would like to show the difference that there is when it comes to the Office of the Prosecutor's position to that of the Chamber, and I shall present the regrets of the Chief Prosecutor, Karim Khan. He would have wished to be here at this hearing for the same reasons as I have just mentioned, to express the differences with the court, but due to his functions, it hasn't been possible for him, and he is not in The Hague. Your Honour, judges, before giving the floor to Mr. du Théâtre, I would first of all, and very briefly, like to remind you of the context of this case, a context which is particularly relevant for the assessment of the sentence, which is the most appropriate to be put on Mr. Al-Hassan, whose guilt has been decided on in the charges and has been expressed in the charges. And, Your Honours, I have said here that it was in the month of May last year when I addressed you within the framework of our final submissions, and I said that this trial was not a trial against Islam. I would once again like to take this opportunity to reiterate this assertion, and I want to do so with all the more force, given that it was the Timbuktu population who are essentially Muslim, who are the victims of the crimes perpetrated. And this trial, as the one that preceded it, in the previous situation where there was an arrest in the same situation, this is a trial against men, people, and against one man in this case, a man who, due to an inflexible vision, joined an enterprise harming the population of Timbuktu. Now, what does Timbuktu actually represent? Timbuktu is a mythical town. It is one of the oldest in Africa, the flower of Mali since the 13th century. Timbuktu is the crossroads of the Niger River and the Sahara River, and a place where gold and salt sales take place. And for my generation, born in Africa, Timbuktu was a town whose history, we learnt about it, was in all history manuals. And this town brings knowledge of dromedaries, and the behind the Saharan dunes, it was the junction with the entire North Africa. Timbuktu was the town which, through commerce and other aspects, it embraced Islam. Timbuktu is the town of Mansa Musa, who built his first mosque from the beginning of the 14th century. Madam, Your Honours, it is up to the inhabitants of this town, the precursor of Islam in West Africa, a town where theology was very much at the heart of things right from the 15th century, in the prestigious university. It was also a town in which Islam never drove out the animist practices. Ladies and gentlemen, it is for the inhabitants of this cosmopolitan town and their traditions, which have been fed by centuries of history and mixing, and it is among these inhabitants that these groups had the pretension to teach them of a new way of living their religion. And when you go back through the different aspects, Al-Hassan took place in a negation of a culture, of a disdain for a culture, and the pedagogical aspects of this group was violence, a pedagogy of humiliation. Your Honours, the religious and ideological labels that often give rise to a moral justification that the perpetrator of the crimes against humanity are war crimes. They have no compassion or commiseration. They are so convinced by their act, that harm that they're doing, that they leave nothing for their victims. And the case file that we have against Al-Hassan, which you will judge today, follows exactly this pathway. And it is the entire population of Timbuktu which was persecuted, terrorized. Women, girls particularly suffered in their hearts and in their dignity. And within the framework of Al-Hassan, to present certain individual characteristics, it is an aggravating singularity, one that aggravates the crimes when it comes to the commission of crimes that he was associated with. Al-Hassan was not a foreigner, a stranger to the Timbuktu community. He was not a stranger from elsewhere who brought the so-called good word. Al-Hassan was a child of Timbuktu. So, taking into account the reality and the customs of his community, and nevertheless he chose to put himself against them. Your Honours, the occupation of Timbuktu did not last for a long time, but the passage of this group and the stigma is very much embedded in the hearts of this population. these groups
Alassane a rejoint
that Al
non pas
Hassan
par
joined
contrainte,
were not
volontairement.
forced,
Et du reste,
but
avec
voluntarily,
un certain zèle, pour ne pas dire un zèle.
zealously indeed.
Donc ces groupes
These
n'ont
groups
pas fini de
did
sévir.
not finish
Aujourd'hui,
making today
une bonne partie de
a
l'Afrique de
good
l'Ouest,
part of West
Mali
Africa,
au Niger,
from Mali to
en passant
Niger,
par le Burkina
going
Faso,
through Burkina Faso,
sans oublier
and
peut-être
without
les
forgetting
escarmouches, qui
perhaps
s'en vont
the
jusqu'en Côte d'Ivoire et au
other areas going to Côte d'Ivoire, Benin. So what I was saying was that all these parts of Africa, from West Africa,
est plongé dans l'insécurité.
have been plunged into insecurity.
C'est vous dire, mesdames,
That is to
messieurs
say,
les juges,
ladies and gentlemen, your honours, that your verdict is highly awaited. It is very much awaited in Africa, and furthermore, it is all the more awaited in this West Africa,
que je vous dis,
where there has been such killing.
mesdames, messieurs les juges,
And I have to tell you, your honours, that in this part of
les
Africa,
systèmes judiciaires,
where the
malmenés
judicial
par des
systems,
décennies d'instabilité,
which have suffered
restent
from
encore fragiles,
decades of instability, they are still
les regards,
fragile.
et je pèse ici mes mots,
And here I'm going to weigh my words. When it comes
tournés
to
vers la CPI.
the view,
Donc,
when
et
it
je
comes
suis
to the
content
regard of everyone, it is all turned towards the ICC. And I am 100% sure that you will meet the challenge in this respect. And now I would hand over to my colleague Jules Dutatre, who will speak further about the aggravating circumstances and specific circumstances.
Excusez-moi de ces quelques instants.
Excuse me, I just needed a moment.
Bonjour Madame la Présidente.
Good morning, Your
Bonjour,
Honours.
Monsieur le juge. Bonjour Monsieur le juge.
Good morning, Presiding Judge.
L'accusation
The prosecution
requiert aujourd'hui
today
un minimum de 22
is
années
seeking a
d'emprisonnement
minimum of 22 years
à l'encontre de Monsieur Alassane
in
Ag
prison
Abdelaziz Ag Mahmoud.
in the case of Mr. Al-Hassan Ag Abdul Aziz Ag Mohammed Ag Mahmoud.
Je pèse mes mots avec solennité.
Now, I will speak with some gravity this morning.
Les faits pour lesquels votre chambre a condamné Monsieur Alassane le 26 juin
This
2024
chamber convicted Mr. Al-Hassan of certain crimes on the 26th of June 2024,
d'extrême gravité.
and those crimes were of the most grave nature.
Je les cite.
Allow me
Torture
to
comme
list
crime de
them.
guerre et comme crime contre l'humanité.
Torture as a war crime and crime against humanity,
Mutilation.
mutilation,
Traitement cruel.
cruel treatment,
Atteinte à la dignité de la personne.
inhumane acts, or interpreter corrects, not inhumane acts, but rather assaults on the dignity of the individual.
Sanctions prononcées sans jugement préalable par une cour régulièrement constituée.
Convictions pronounced by an irregularly constituted court,
Et au total, persécution pour motif religieux.
and in general, persecution for religious means or grounds.
Je vous donne très brièvement la ventilation des peines que l'on peut rendre par chef d'accusation avant de revenir sur la totalité de
Now, I shall now go through these various offences and then move on to the totality of
Vous
what
l'avez
is
dans nos écrits,
requested.
mais c'est aux fins d'information du public.
In our submissions, we have made this clear to you. They are available to the general
L'accusation
public
demande
also.
22 ans d'emprisonnement pour
So
le
the
crime de
prosecution is requesting 22 years for the crime of persecution,
20 ans pour celui de torture,
20 years for the crime of torture,
15 ans pour celui
15
de
years for the crime of
mutilation,
mutilation,
20 ans
20
d'emprisonnement pour les
years
atteintes à la dignité de la personne,
for crimes against the dignity of an individual,
8 à 9 ans d'emprisonnement
8 to 9
pour les
years
autres actes inhumains,
for other inhumane acts and cruel treatment,
20 ans pour
and 20 years
les sanctions prononcées sans jugement préalable par une cour régulièrement constituée.
for convictions handed down by an irregularly constituted court.
Et je vais m'en expliquer. L'accusation soumet qu'un minimum de 22 ans.
And I shall explain that the prosecution is requesting a minimum of 22 years in prison and insists upon the fact that this is absolutely necessary.
Toute la population de la ville de Tombouctou
The
et de sa région,
entire population of the city of Timbuktu and the surrounding region,
une population entière et sans défense,
a population in its entirety and defenseless,
femmes et enfants compris,
comprising
a été
women and
soumise à
children
une
also,
répression
were
brutale
subjected
par les
to
groupes armés
brutal
Al-Qaïda au Maghreb islamique,
oppression by armed groups, Al-Qaeda and Maghreb, the Islamic Maghreb and Ansar Din.
Tombouctou occupé, Tombouctou défiguré,
Timbuktu was
Tombouctou
occupied,
martyrisé
it was
au fil d'une
defigured,
répression méthodique,
it was persecuted
longue et brutale.
over the course of a long, brutal and methodological series of repression.
En un mot, Tombouctou persécuté.
In a word,
d'avril 2012 à
Timbuktu
janvier
was
2013,
persecuted from April 2012 to
par
January
deux groupes armés
2013 by two
composés
armed
essentiellement de
groups
non-Tombouctou.
made up primarily of non-Timbuktu natives.
Et ce, avec la complicité et la coopération de
And
certains
this,
habitants de la ville,
With the goodwill and cooperation of certain
en particulier
persons who
avec la
resided in the
complicité et la
city, and in
participation
particular
proactive et
with
continue
the assistance and proactive participation and continuous participation of Mr. Al-Hassan,
ainsi que
who
M. le procureur général
was
déjà.
a son of the region, as the deputy prosecutor has just underlined.
D'emblée, une image revient parmi tant d'autres.
Furthermore, an
à l'esprit,
image comes
mesdames,
to
messieurs les
mind,
juges.
as do many others.
Cette image,
Your
c'est
Honours,
Al-Hassan
and that
qui
image
frappe
is
copieusement
of Mr.
deux
Al-Hassan, who is beating wildly on two men.
hommes. On est vers le 8 juillet 2012,
It's approximately the 8th
Sur
of
une place
July
publique.
2012,
au centre-ville de Tombouctou,
in a public place in the
non
center
loin
of
de la Banque malienne de
Timbuktu,
solidarité.
close to the Malian
Il y a du
Bank
monde
of
autour, y compris les
Solidarity.
enfants.
Everybody is
Vous avez
present,
visionné des
including
vidéos de cet
children.
événement.
You
Les faits
yourselves
sont
have
tout à fait
viewed
clairs.
video recordings of that event. What happened is absolutely clear.
Les deux victimes sont menottées.
The two victims were
Al-Hassan tient les clés
bound.
des menottes.
Uh,
Il tient aussi un fouet à
Al-Hassan
la main.
had the keys to those handcuffs, and he's holding a whip in his hand.
Al-Hassan n'est pas un simple exécutant.
Here, Al-Hassan
Il
is
est
not
clairement
just
dans un rôle de
similar,
leader.
simply following orders.
Il
No, he's
supervise
clearly
le
here
châtiment avec son collègue Abou
in the
Tsar.
role of a leader, and he is supervising the
La Chambre l'a dit
punishments
au
being
paragraphe
meted out by his
763 du
colleague
jugement.
Abu
Je
Zar.
cite,
And I would quote from the judgment here,
Mr.
paragraph
Al-Hassan and Abu
763.
Zar were both
Mr.
overseeing the execution of this punishment.
Abu Hazar and Mr. Al-Hassan were both involved in the conduct of this
Al-Hassan donne
execution.
les clés à Abou Zar.
So
Ce dernier ôte les menottes du
Al-Hassan
justicier.
gives the keys to Abu Zar, who
Puis,
removes the
à tour de
handcuffs, and then
Al-Hassan et Abou Zar
turned by
leur
turn,
assènent méthodiquement
Al-Hassan and
une
Abu
véritable punition
Zar
de fouet.
subject the individual to many lashings.
Sur les vidéos, on voit deux hommes se tordre sous la
On the
douleur.
video, we see two individuals who are writhing in
Al-Hassan
agony.
s'applique tout particulièrement à
Al-Hassan
asséner les coups.
It's particularly het up with the
On entend le feu
meting
claquer
out of whippings.
avec une régularité
We
poignante de
hear
métronome.
the whip lash with a regularity of the whipping of his own wrist, much like a metronome.
Je le rappelle, vous le savez, la Chambre a compté environ 80 coups de
And I
fouet
would
pour chaque
remind you
victime.
that the chamber
80.
counted approximately 80 lashes for each
dont au
victim,
moins 34
80,
donnés par Al-Hassan pour la première victime,
of which at least 34 were meted out by Al-Hassan on the first victim and at least 37 given by Al-Hassan when it came to the second victim.
Quel crime avaient donc pu bien commettre ces deux pauvres individus
What
sans
crime
défense,
could
frappés
these
violemment,
two
humiliés
defenseless
devant tout le monde?
individuals have committed to be beaten so violently and humiliated in public?
Tout simplement, ils n'avaient pas suivi une des
Quite
nouvelles
simply,
règles
they had not adhered
et
to
interdits mises en place
the
par
latest,
Al-Qaïda au Maghreb islamique et Ansar.
rules, prohibited rules, which had been put in place by Al-Qaeda in the Islamic
Il y a qu'un mot
Maghreb
pour décrire cette scène
and
de
by
torture publique
Ansar ad-Din.
insupportable. Souffrance,
All that we can say
humiliation,
is that
terrorisation.
it is horrific to see what we saw on that recording, suffering, humiliation, terrorization.
d'Al-Qaïda au Maghreb islamique
But
et
that
dans
was
Sardine, à laquelle
daily life in
Al-Assad
Timbuktu
a choisi de gérer
under
prendre part.
Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and Ansar ad-Din. And Al-Hassan participated voluntarily and willingly in all of this.
Avec tous ces bons, diligents et loyaux services et ces basses œuvres au service
So
d'Al-Qaïda au Maghreb
all his
islamique et dans
good
Sardine,
and loyal, diligent service and all these appalling tasks that he carried out in the service of Al-Qaeda in
Al-Hassan
Islamic
terminera comme
Maghreb
chef de la
and
police
for
islamique.
Ansar ad-Din,
Il a en effet
this was all done
clairement
by
profité de ce régime de
Al-Hassan,
persécution pour faire
and he
carrière et
rose
mener à
to
bien ses ambitions
become the
personnelles
head of the
sur le
Islamic
travail.
police. And very clearly, he benefited from this regime of persecution to make a good career for himself and to fulfill his own personal ambitions. And I'll say more about that later. Now, briefly, how did one come to this? That Al-Hassan became involved in such a faithful way in this organized and methodological system of violence, torture, and mutilation, which also involved cruel treatment of this innocent population who had no one to step up for them.
C'est nécessaire d'en toucher un mot pour bien juger, je dirais même.
I think it's important to say something about this in order to be able to judge and to assess the behavior of Al-Hassan and to understand the gravity of the crimes which of which he has been found guilty, and to better understand the impact, which was immense on the very numerous victims which he had. It's also important to understand the aggravating circumstances, which were multiple, and which were the backdrop to the commission of these crimes, as well as the discriminatory nature and the zealous attitude of Al-Hassan.
Revenons un tout petit peu en arrière.
But let's step back a bit.
Al-Qaïda au Maghreb islamique formait de beaucoup
So,
d'étrangers.
Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State were in the Mali since 1998. Paragraph 432 of the judgment. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic State is biding its time to create a state in the image of its ideology. Ansar ad-Din, for its part, is created by Iyad Ag-Ghali at the end of 2011. So during a preaching recorded in 2012, he proclaimed, and I quote, "We share everything with Al-Qaeda. We share everything." And indeed, Ansar ad-Din is used by Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb as a local front to achieve its objectives. History will give these groups the opportunity to launch a lightning offensive in northern Mali. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and other armed groups such as Mujah and MNLA took control of the entire north of Mali in less than 3 months. The first attack took place in mid-January 2012. Timbuktu fell on the 1st of April 2012 after the Malian army had to flee the town. On that day, a militia and then the MNLA entered Timbuktu. They started looting. The militia quickly left the area. For their part, Ansar ad-Din and Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb were clearly close by and on the lookout. These two groups, armed to the teeth, entered Timbuktu the very next day, 2nd of April 2012. They drove out the MNLA, and they now had exclusive and total control over their prey, the legendary city of Timbuktu. After deliberately causing chaos and the departure of the Malian authorities from northern Mali, and creating an institutional vacuum, Ansardine and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb pretend, and I would like to say pretend, to be the saviors and restorers of order. It's the old fire and brimstone trick. From then on, they would reign supreme in Timbuktu and the surrounding region, causing suffering to the local population. They made this town, a sad laboratory and media showcase for the application of their personal religious vision, using violence and fear. And this was done with the agreement of Al-Hassan, who is an opportunist and a careerist. It is in this context, and you have already ruled on this, that Al-Hassan personally committed, assisted or contributed to the commission of various crimes perpetrated in the relentless implementation of the religious vision of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and Ansardine. So that is the general background. If we now delve a little deeper into the implacable mechanics of the system of persecution put in case by Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and Ansardine, with whom Al-Hassan deliberately collaborated. The deputy prosecutor has already mentioned that Timbuktu, the city of 333 saints, is a major historical, spiritual and intellectual center of great importance in Africa. It is a heterogeneous city comprising a variety of ethnic groups. A town which before 2012 people were free to practice all kinds of religious traditions as they wished. For example, praying at the mausoleum sites. A city where the inhabitants could exercise their freedoms. In other words, and I'm just quoting the chamber here, Timbuktu was a city where the social life was a patchwork of varied behaviors governed by different social norms depending on the community. But things changed dramatically with the arrival of Ansardine and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. Your chamber itself concluded, it indicated that the members of the population felt that everything had changed and described the atmosphere in the city as terror everywhere and confinement. They described the city itself as a dead city and a ghost town. That's in paragraphs 36 and 738 of the judgment. The town was, in fact, subject to regulations and subject to many bans and prohibitions. And in order to achieve their aims, Al-Qaeda and Ansardine ensured that they included locals like Al-Hassan into their ranks, who knew the town, they knew its inhabitants, the languages, and the local ways as well. Al-Hassan was indeed one of these inhabitants of Timbuktu who joined Ansardine and Al-Qaeda from the outset during the occupation, and whose role was key in being an interface with the local inhabitants. The chamber noted this. The testimony of defense witness D0211 demonstrates that Al-Hassan joined Ansardine voluntarily. The chamber also found that Al-Hassan worked with Ansardine and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb from the end of 2012. This was therefore in the very earliest hours of the occupation. In fact, on the ground, Al-Hassan was an important cog in the wheel. He was at the heart of the functioning of the police. his role was
dans la
pivotal
répression de la
in
population
the
menée sans relâche
relentless
par
repression
Ansar
of the
Dine et
population by
Al-Qaïda
Ansar Dine and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic
Al-Hassan
Maghreb.
n'était pas simplement un rouage important,
Al-Hassan
il
wasn't
était
just
un
an
rouage
important cog, he
constant.
was a constant, permanent cog
Pendant toute l'occupation.
throughout the entire occupation.
Et on va le voir bientôt sur la
And
base des
we shall
conclusions.
soon see on the basis of your chamber's findings.
Les choses vont très vite dès le
Things
départ.
went very fast from the very start,
Et les habitants
and
sont
the
très rapidement
inhabitants
privés de leurs droits
were very quickly
fondamentaux.
deprived of their most fundamental rights.
Une avalanche de
There
nouvelles
was an
règles et
avalanche of
interdits dans tous les
new
domaines de
rules and prohibitions in all areas of people's lives.
tout cela est listé dans le jugement.
It is all listed in the
Je vous
judgment.
éviterai une
I
liste
will
longue et lancinante.
avoid giving you
Juste
an
quelques
extensive and exhaustive list, but here are a few
Les femmes ne
examples.
pouvaient plus sortir
Women
sans un
could
voile.
no longer go out without a
Les
veil.
femmes ne pouvaient plus se promener
Women
avec un homme
were
s'il
no
n'était
longer
pas
allowed to
soumis à un
walk with
parent.
a man unless he was a
La danse et la
relative.
musique sont
Dancing
interdites,
and
les fêtes
music were prohibited, and festivals or partying was also prohibited.
Et toutes ces règles
And all these rules
sont mises en œuvre
were implemented
en cas de violation par des sanctions des châtiments corporels extrêmement
with
sévères.
corporal punishment, with severe corporal
Un
punishment.
tombereau de punitions.
There was a whole raft of punishments,
Comme on l'a vu avec Al-Hassan,
as
qui
we've
frappait
seen
deux hommes
with
en juillet
Al-Hassan, who was striking the two men in July 2012.
Al-Hassan lui-même
Al-Hassan
a reconnu que les
himself
punitions
admits
infligées
that
en
the
cas de violation des
punishments
nouvelles règles
in the
sont
case of
inattendues.
breaching the new rules were unheard of in Timbuktu.
Il a déclaré aux enquêteurs du
He
bureau du
declared
procureur,
to investigators from the Office of the Prosecutor, and here I quote,
ces punitions,
"These punishments,
les habitants ne les connaissaient
the
pas.
inhabitants didn't know about them.
C'est la première fois qu'ils les
It
voient.
was the first time that they saw them.
Tout le monde craignait,
Everyone was
avait
afraid.
peur du mot djihadiste,
Everyone was afraid of the word
craignait les
jihadist.
punitions.
They feared punishment.
D'emblée, on constate chez
From the
Al-Hassan
very
un haut
outset,
degré de
Al-Hassan
connaissance,
showed a high
une
degree of
intention
knowledge
de conviction et de
and
peine.
intent that justifies a heavy sentence.
Tout est dit dans ses propos,
Almost everything is said in this
Enfin, pas tout à fait.
extract. Well, not quite,
parce que
because
Ansar
Ansar
Dine,
Dine
et
and Islamic
Al-Qaïda
Maghreb
au
and
Maghreb
Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb
n'hésitent pas à utiliser la torture
do not
pour
hesitate
extorquer des
to use
aveux,
torture to extract confessions
D'aucuns
from
arrêtés pour tel ou
Timbuktu
tel prétexte
residents
et les
arrested
pire.
on one pretext or another and then to punish them.
Concrètement, comment
In
ça
practical
fonctionne-t-il et
terms,
quel est le rôle
how does this
d'Al-Hassan
work
dans tout cela?
on a day-to-day basis, and what exactly is Al-Hassan's role in all of this?
Les nouvelles règles sont
The
annoncées
new
publiquement
roles
lors de
are announced
meetings.
publicly at
d'affichage,
meetings,
La surveillance et la
and
répression sont
surveillance
continues jour et
and
nuit.
repression continue day and night.
Transgresseurs sont traqués,
Transgressors
arrêtés, châtiés.
are hunted down and punished.
Pendant les premières semaines,
During
c'est
the
Abu
first
Talha
weeks of
et le
Equal,
bataillon
it
de
was
sécurité
Abu
qui
Talha
sont
and
le
his security
principal
battalion who
barbier
was the main armed wing
Ansar Dine
of
et
Ansar
Al-Qaïda.
Dine and
Mais
Al-Qaeda.
dès ce stade, on trouve déjà
But
Al-Hassan qui travaille
already
activement
from this
avec
stage, Al-Hassan
Abu
was
Talha.
already actively working with Abu Talha.
Puis, dès fin
Then,
avril 2012,
from the end
début
of
mai
April
2012,
2012, beginning of May
Ansar
2012,
Dine et Al-Qaïda
Ansar Dine
Maghreb
and
islamique
Al-Qaeda in the
créent
Islamic
des
Maghreb
organes dédiés
created
chargés de
dedicated
les aider à
bodies
imposer par la
to
force
help them
leur nouveau
impose
dictat
their new dictates by
et à œuvrer
force
ensemble pour
and to
assujettir
work
les
together to
habitants,
subjugate
à commencer
the
par-
inhabitants, starting with women.
ainsi de la brigade des mœurs,
These
le
include
tribunal
the Morality
islamique,
Brigade, the
et
Islamic
surtout la
Court,
police
and
islamique,
above all, the Islamic Police,
où Al-Hassan exerce
in
un rôle
which
significatif.
Al-Hassan played a significant role.
Les sanctions tombent drues
The penalties are severe.
dans les cas
In the case
envoyés par la police et la
that
brigade des mœurs au
the
tribunal,
police or
dont votre
Morality
Chambre
Brigade
a indiqué qu'il était dénué
were involved,
d'indépendance et d'impartialité.
which the chamber said had no
Ou
independence
dans les cas
or
où la police,
impartiality,
par exemple,
or
inflige elle-même
when
directement des
they
sanctions,
directly inflicted sanctions
passer par le
themselves without going through a tribunal.
je l'ai annoncé, Al-Hassan est au cœur
As
de
I
cette
said,
politique
Al-Hassan was at
de
the heart of this police system of surveillance and punishment.
Non seulement Alassane
Not
fait partie
only
de la police,
was Al-Hassan a
qui
member
est
of
l'un
the
des
police
organes
force,
majeurs de la
which was
répression
one of the
chargé de
major
forcer la
repressive
population
bodies
d'adhérer à la
responsible for
population
forcing the
d'Arménie,
population to adhere to the religion,
d'Ansardine et d'Al-Qaïda.
promoted by Ansar Din and Al-Qaeda.
Mais encore, Alassane est un membre
But
important
once
de
again,
cette
he was an
police.
important member
Il n'a
of
jamais
the
été un petit
Islamic
poisson.
police. He was never a small fish.
C'est un poisson.
He's a big fish, an important fish.
La défense a
The
toujours
defence has
jusqu'à présent vu la
always
police
sought to
comme un
portray the
organe
police
secondaire.
as a secondary body.
Mais votre chambre l'a souligné,
However, as your chamber pointed out,
la police est la plus
the
visible
police
des
are the most
institutions mises en
visible
place.
of the institutions
Par
set up
1966. La police
by.
met en œuvre les règles
They
internes
implement the
instaurées
rules
par Ansar
and
Din et
prohibitions
Al-Qaïda.
introduced by Al-Sadin and Al-Qaeda.
La police a comme fonction
The police
fondamentale
had a fundamental
emprisonnement et
job.
punition,
Imprisonment and punishment, they were their fundamental
comme le
functions,
dit la Chambre.
as the chamber has said.
Dans la fait, la police fait la chasse à
So,
tous
in
ceux qui
practice, the
enfreignent les
police
règles.
were hunting down
Elle
anyone who
patrouille,
broke
elle
the
arrête,
new
elle
rules.
interroge,
It was
elle renvoie
patrolling
les affaires au
and it
tribunal,
was referring
fait
cases to the tribunal
les sanctions.
and executing the sanctions.
Au total,
In total,
le jugement retient au
the
paragraphe
judgment
1686
in
et
the
1673
paragraphs 586 and 1673,
the Islamic police was
The-
not an accessory organ. The Islamic police, which was involved in the arrest, the detention, as well as the punishment of individuals found in breach of the rules and prohibition, was brought to intervene at all relevant stages of the enforcement of the rules imposed by Ansar Din. It is before, during, after the victims were arrested and or sentenced and or punished. As such, the Islamic police played a pivotal role in the system of repression, at the heart of which lies notably the commission of the crimes of torture, other inhuman acts, cruel treatment, outrages upon personal dignity and mutilation. Et dans tout cela,
and in all of this,
membre de la
Al-Hassan,
police,
a member
lourd de
of the
conséquences.
police, played a role with far-reaching consequences.
Il avait un rôle clé.
He had a key role,
Je me réfère au jugement
and here I'm
paragraphe
referring to the judgment,
1056
paragraphs
à
1056
1086,
to
en particulier
1086, and in
paragraphe
particular
1063,
1063 to 1065.
Bien plus,
And furthermore,
Al-Hassan est en fait un membre
Al-Hassan
vital
was
de
a
la police.
vital member
Ce n'est
of
pas
the police.
l'accusation qui le
It's
dit.
not the prosecution that
Vital,
says
c'est
so.
le mot utilisé
Vital
par
is the
la
word
Chambre dans le
used
jugement du
by the
26
chamber in
Par
its
exemple,
judgment of the
paragraphe
26th of June. For
1594
example,
et
in
1600.
paragraph 1594 and 1600.
Vital, c'est un mot qui a
Vital
lourd de
is a
sens.
word that carries a lot of meaning.
Votre chambre a jugé qu'Al-Hassan a
Your
commencé à
chamber
travailler
found
avec la
that
police
Al-Hassan
vers
began
au moins
working with the
2000.
Islamic police around May 2012.
Ce qui est clair, c'est qu'il
And what
assume
is clear,
complètement le rôle de
that
la
he
police
completely
et sa
assumed his
participation à
role
cet
in
organe.
the police and participation in this body.
Rappelez-vous la
If
vidéo
you
prise le
remember
7
the video taken on the 7th of November 2012,
Elle est enregistrée au gouvernorat.
it was recorded at the Governorate in Timbuktu on the premises of the police,
Al-Hassan est interrogé
Al-Hassan
sur les
seated,
missions de la police islamique.
at the mission of the Islamic police.
Il a une allure parfaitement détendue.
He looks perfectly
Il est à l'aise dans
relaxed.
son élément.
He's at ease in his element.
Je cite ses paroles,
And I quote
traduites
his
de l'arabe
words
vers
here,
l'anglais.
translated from Arabic into English.
We do have a lot of work. It involves patrols within the town and correcting objectionable acts, any type of reprehensible act which has been forbidden. We correct such as drinking alcohol, smoking, and a woman adorning herself, and other such acts. In Timbuktu, only one hand has been chopped off, and only one murderer has been executed. And then 2 or 3 perpetrators have been flogged. Et Al-Hassan ajoute,
Al-Hassan adds,
c'est significatif,
and this is meaningful.
we want to be overworked. Fin de citation.
End of quote.
C'est une preuve contemporaine de l'époque.
So this is contemporary evidence from the time.
Il ressort plusieurs choses.
Now,
des
several
propos
things
d'Al-Hassan.
emerge from Al-Hassan's words.
L'adhésion aux
The
nouvelles règles et
adherence to
y
the
compris
new
concernant
rules,
les femmes.
including those concerning women,
Women adorning herself.
women adorning themselves,
de même que l'adhésion à la violence,
as
et
well
aussi
as
la
the adherence to
banalisation
violence
du recours.
and the trivialization of the use or banalization, prominence of the use of violent
Et un peu
methods.
plus loin dans la vidéo,
And a
on
bit
voit
further in
dans
the
le procès, Alassane
video,
conclut ses propos en
Al-Hassan
rigolant
concludes
avec
his
son interlocuteur.
remarks by laughing with his interlocutor.
C'est clair, c'est
It's
sans
clear,
complexe.
it's unabashed.
Alassane adhère au
Al-Hassan
dessein
subscribes
d'Al-Sardine
to
et
the
d'Al-Qaïda
plans
au
of Ansardine and
d'imposer leur
Akim
vision
to
religieuse.
impose their religious vision on the population.
Alors,
So,
ainsi, il n'est pas étonnant qu'Alassane,
it's hardly surprising
avec
then
une telle
that
attitude,
Al-Hassan's
ait égalé la
attitude
police.
has seen him rise through the ranks of the police.
Peu de temps après avoir débuté comme interprète,
Soon after
il
starting
a
out as an
commencé à rédiger des
interpreter,
rapports,
he
à
started
exercer
writing
des fonctions
reports,
administratives
performing
et à
administrative
organiser le
duties, and
travail de la police.
organizing the work of the police,
Aussi bien tout en étant
as well as
subordonné
being
au premier
subordinate
chef
to the
successif de la
first two
police,
successive
Adama
chiefs of
Khaled.
police, Adama and then Khaled.
Alassane avait un rôle
Al-Hassan
de
had
leadership et
a
de supervision
leadership
dans les
and
opérations.
supervisory role in police operations.
La Chambre l'a retenu dans
The
le jugement,
chamber says so
et elle
in the
précise,
judgment,
entre
and
autres
it
notamment,
states, among others,
au paragraphe
in
553,
paragraph 5.3,
both Mr. Alassane and Abu Zar were deputies of the Emir of the police. At least at some point during the relevant period, Mr. Alassane was hierarchically superior to Abu Zar. Et on s'aperçoit vite que le portefeuille
and you can
d'Alassane à la
see
police
soon that the
et on ne
portfolio of
peut plus
Al-Hassan in the
varier
police could no longer
reflète ses
vary,
compétences sans doute,
and reflected
mais
its
aussi son
competence certainly,
activité,
but in
assiduité,
terms
ses
of
droits
its
et son application.
assiduity and its application.
De manière générale,
Now,
on peut
in a
dire
general
qu'Alassane
way, it
touchait
can
à
be
tout
said that
et avait
Al-Hassan
une autorité certaine.
was involved in everything and had certain authority.
Il tranchait des disputes,
He decided on
pouvait autoriser
disputes.
des activités
He could
journalistiques,
authorize
donner,
journalistic
comme on l'a vu,
activity or
des
give,
interviews
as
aux
we have
médias.
seen, interviews to the media.
Mais permettez-moi
But if you would allow me
de rappeler une dizaine de
to
conclusions
recall
précises faites par
some
votre
previous
chambre dans le
conclusions
jugement daté
made
du
by
26 juin
your
2004
chamber
sur le rôle d'Alassane
on the
dans
role
la
of
punition des
Al-Hassan
habitants,
and the punishment of the inhabitants,
et de rappeler des propos
and to
tenus
recall
par Alassane
the
lui-même,
words
soit
of Al-Hassan himself
aux enquêteurs du livre du
to
procureur,
the
soit à l'époque en
investigators of the
2012,
Office of the Prosecutor,
lorsqu'il
or in
parlait
2012
officiellement
when
au
he
nom
was
de
speaking
d'Al-Qaïda
officially
Maghreb.
to Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb.
Il en ressort qu'Alassane a eu un
So
haut degré
Al-Hassan
de
had a high degree of
participation
participation
et d'attention
and intent
concernant
concerning
la commission
the
des crimes pour
commission
lesquels il a
of
été
crimes
condamné.
for which he was convicted.
Il en ressort qu'Alassane a
It
contribué de
appears
façon
that Al-Hassan
significative
contributed significantly
à la campagne
to the
menée
campaign
par Al-Qaïda
carried out
islamique et
by
Ansardine,
Al-Qaeda in the
visant
Islamic
la
Maghreb
population
and Ansardine to target the population for religious reasons.
et de par son rôle
And
clé
he did this
à la
through
police,
his key role in the
son
police
implication dans la
and
promotion
his
des nouvelles
involvement
règles
in the promotion
et
of
le
new
système de
rules
surveillance
and
policière.
in the system of police surveillance.
Premièrement,
Firstly,
Al-Hassan
Al-Hassan organized patrols in accordance with the instructions of the head of the Islamic police.
indiquant aux policiers
He would tell police officers where to patrol.
paragraphe 1062.
Paragraph 106.9 of the judgment.
S'agissant des patrouilles,
With regards to patrols,
Al-Hassan déclare lui-même aux
Al-Hassan
enquêteurs
himself
d'Al-Qaïda, je cite,
told ICC investigators,
j'inscrivais les noms,
I wrote down the names,
c'est-à-dire les noms des hommes,
I mean the names of the men,
la garde
every
de celui-ci
day, guard of this
ou celui-ci.
or that one.
Or, on sait quel rôle avaient ces
We
patrouilles
know
dans le
the role these
contrôle, la
patrols played
surveillance et
in
l'arrestation
controlling,
des habitants.
monitoring and arresting residents.
Deuxièmement,
Secondly,
Al-Hassan participait
Al-Hassan
parfois
sometimes
personnellement à
took
des
part
patrouilles.
personally in patrols.
Je renvoie encore au
And here
paragraphe
I would refer
1069.
once again to paragraph 1069 of the judgment.
Mais souvenez-vous aussi de
But
l'interview
you
donnée
will
par
also
Al-Hassan le
remember
5
the
octobre
interview
2012
given by
au
Al-Hassan on the 5th of October 2012 at the governorate.
Il évoquait alors le début
He
de
mentions
l'occupation,
at the
et que
beginning
dit-il
of the occupation, and what does he say?
Il déclare, je
He
cite,
says, and
Si
I
vous étiez
quote,
venus les
if you
premiers
had
jours,
come in the first few days,
dormait qu'une heure ou
we
deux,
only slept
et
an
nos
hour
voitures
or
ont
two,
remplacé
and
la
our
voiture
cars,
d'essence le matin,
we filled the car with petrol in the
soir, les
morning, and
voitures.
in the evening it was already empty.
Al-Hassan est bien sur le terrain.
Al-Hassan, of course, was in the field.
Troisièmement,
Thirdly, Al-Hassan was involved in the arrest of people accused of crimes by Ansar Dine and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. And here I refer you to the case of Dedi Maiga, which I will refer to later. Fourthly, Al-Hassan took part in the investigations and interrogations. Paragraph 1073 of the judgment. The interrogations were sometimes harsh. This is something that was stressed. In cases involving public property, Al-Hassan acknowledged that if a person did not tell the truth, they could be tortured. Those are his own words. He also told investigators from the Office of the Prosecutor that if a person refused to confess, and here I quote, you have to get the truth out of them. You have to threaten them. Normal as a threat. We're going to do this to you. We're going to torture you. Al-Hassan adds, if he doesn't admit it by threat, we have to torture him, beating the person, striking the person. The defense tries to play this down in paragraph 16 of its submission, which it says is inaccurate. Al-Hassan himself personally threatened a suspect he was interrogating at the time when the police started operating at the BMS. Al-Hassan pulled out a knife and he told his victim to put his hand on the table, and he threatened to cut it off if he did not tell the truth. This is also in paragraph 1073 of the judgment. They organized patrols, arrest, interrogations. Fifth point, he also wrote and signed police reports, which were then sent to the Islamic court for judgment. He signed such reports, and here I would remind you, Your Honours, from the 23rd of May to the 4th of December 2012. And in fact, all the police reports found by the OTP are drafted and signed by Al-Hassan himself, and I refer in particular to paragraph 343 of the judgment of 26th of June. One example. A police report of the 16th of July 2012 in an alcohol case. In this report to the tribunal, Al-Hassan writes that the suspect was, and I quote, interrogated and tortured, but in vain. Footnote 3688 of the judgment. In this regard, I would like to point out a slight misreading or an ambiguity in the defense brief. The defense indicates in paragraph that the chamber would have found.
Ce n'est pas exactement cela.
That's not exactly the case. The chamber stated that the torture was carried out.
C'est pas la même chose.
That's not the same thing. And in this sense, I also refer to the footnote. And here we have to say that a quick reading can give a distorted picture of what the chamber actually said. Now, still on this torture case, the defense states, and this is paragraph 36, that he was a simple interpreter. And here I would say that this doesn't fit with the facts. On the one hand, the defense gives no source for what they say, and furthermore, you have the report of the 23rd of May signed by Al-Hassan as an investigator. And I would like to stress that because in the defense, this is an imprecision which is in the defense submission, and there are others. And not only Al-Hassan did he write reports, but my sixth point is that he also made recommendations for the tribunal, and he signed a police report on the 19th of June 2012 concerning an incident of debts. And the report in question recommends that the Islamic tribunal is harsh, with ichadidu in Arabic. That's the word in the report drafted by Al-Hassan. And that's 001 7546. And I wouldn't be astonished with the fact that the defense states that the police were essentially dealing with social cases. That has no importance. It's not a foundation that the chamber can base itself on. And it has no importance. The importance is Al-Hassan's role in the facts and with regards to the crimes he is accused of. And he's very much aware of everything that is sent to the tribunal. In an interview given on the 30th of October in Timbuktu, Al-Hassan is questioned with regards to the type of cases sent, and he replies, for example, in the case of the Marabout charlatans, we refer those directly to the tribunal. Thieves, fornicators, people committing major sins, and alcohol drinkers. No, he's not just dealing with social facts, social cases. Patrol, arrest, interrogation, reports. Al-Hassan was also, and this is my 7th point, he would also escort the accused to court accompanied by chief of police or subordinate soldiers. Or sometimes he would send the accused along with police officers. All of this with the police report which was given to Judge Hooker. And one witness said that the suspects could be found guilty solely on the basis of the police report written by Al-Hassan. It's even happened that Al-Hassan testified in court to shed light on his own report. Paragraph 1076 of the judgment. In passing, allow me to correct a small error in the defence's submission and paragraph 34. And this is incorrect when they say that Al-Hassan was released from count 6 of the penalty without a prior trial. And you can refer to the footnote 4642 of the judgment. Patrols, arrest, interrogations, drafting reports, transporting the accused to court. It doesn't stop there. Al-Hassan would take the accused in and out of the courtroom. And also, at the end of the day, Al-Hassan or another policeman would return to escort the defendants. And then Al-Hassan kept a very close eye on things. He would ask whether the judgments had indeed been handed down. As he told the officer, the prosecutor, and here I quote, I always ask whether such and such a judgment has been handed down and when it will be executed. Always is the word used by Al-Hassan himself. This denotes at least a proactive attitude. And it doesn't stop there. Al-Hassan would then escort those sentenced to death to the place where the sentence was to be carried out, including in the case of a death sentence. He accompanied the person with his last prayer, and he had a Kalashnikov slung over his shoulder. And generally he was present where public penalties were being meted out. And you have, for example, Al-Hassan being present, making the area safe when there was the flogging in the Place Saint-Coré. And this was the flogging of a couple who had a child out of wedlock. One of the victims was 14 years old at the time. I will come back to that. And sometimes it was Al-Hassan himself who inflicted the sentence as we saw at the very start of my submissions.
Et bien plus.
Furthermore, in the cases where sanctions were, sometimes there would be punishments without a trial by the court, without a decision of the court,
Directement par la police.
and they would be inflicted directly by the police.
Alassane fait partie des
Al-Hassan was one of the
présents
leaders
aux
present during such punishments,
qui consistait à frapper
which
les gens.
consisted of beating people.
Paragraphe 580.
Paragraph 585.
Alassane dit lui-même que
Al-Hassan
c'était fréquent.
himself says
Il a
that this
déclaré
was a frequent
au bureau du
occurrence.
procureur
He said to the officer of the
que des
prosecutor
peines de 10 coups, 20
that
coups de
sentences of 10 to 20
arrivaient,
lashes
je cite,
happened
tout le temps à la
all the
police.
time at the police.
Tout le temps, on peut pas mieux dire.
All the time.
Alassane précise qu'il y
There's
avait
no better way of
une
putting it.
liste
Al-Hassan points out that there was a list drawn up, and
C'est écrit
it's
dessus, par
written
exemple,
on, for example,
le fumeur à côté,
the
le
smoker
à côté, 10
next
coups
to
de
it.
poing. Fin de citation.
10 lashes. End of quote.
Le témoin
Witness P0065, who's a well-informed witness,
a expliqué,
explained that,
je cite,
and here I quote,
in all activities of Islamic police, we would see
Alassane present and overseeing the activities. Transcript 40. Alassane lui-même a dû rester
transcript 40.
très occupé.
Al-Hassan was very occupied with that. He admitted that himself, that he was very busy with that.
Au total,
Madame la Présidente,
So in total, Your Honours, you will have
les
understood
faits parlent d'eux-mêmes.
that the
Alassane est
facts
présent et
speak for
actif
themselves. Al-Hassan is present and active as a key member of the police
à tous les
at
stades
every
du
stage
processus de
of the
contrôle,
process of
de surveillance,
controlling, monitoring,
d'enquête,
investigating
et de punition de la
and
population.
punishing the population.
Un processus dans
A
lequel la police avait
process
elle-même un rôle
in
décisif.
which the police themselves had a pivotal role.
Il est là à chaque
He
étape
is there at
de
every
la chaîne
stage
pénale
of
d'Ansarine et
the
d'Al-Qaïda, de la chaîne de
chain
répression
of
policière
police
mise en place.
repression which this group set up.
Et surtout,
Ansardine and Akim. And above all,
Alassane est fort satisfait
Al-Hassan
de tout
is
cela.
very satisfied
Il proclame
with all of
fièrement
that.
dans une vidéo
He
prise
proudly
au gouvernorat
proclaims in a
de
video taken at the Governorat in October 2012,
Je cite,
and here I quote,
maintenant,
now,
avec les règles que
with the
nous
rules that we
avons appliquées,
have imposed,
beaucoup de péchés ont baissé,
a lot of sins have been reduced,
tels que l'adultère
such as adultery
et autres grands péchés.
and other major
Les
sins.
choses se sont nettement améliorées.
Things have definitely improved.
Il marque sa satisfaction.
And he marks his high degree of satisfaction.
Au total, le haut degré
In
d'intention et
total,
de participation
the high
d'Alassane
degree
se
of
voit
participation
tout particulièrement
of
dans
Al-Hassan
ses
is
différentes
particularly clear
propositions
in his various comments that he makes, which shows his agreement with and his
à la
support for
politique
the position
d'Ansardine et
of
d'Al-Qaïda au Maghreb
Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and Ansardine,
une politique
a policy
suivant laquelle les
following,
comportements opposés à leur vision
according to
religieuse
which
doivent
that the religious vision must be repressed.
Alassane parle
And
positivement
he
au
speaks
soutien des
positively
objectifs de ces groupes
in support of the objectives of these groups,
et mentionne clairement
and he
son
clearly
soutien
mentions
personnel
his
et
personal
sa
support
participation
and his
active à leurs
active participation in the activities of these groups.
À ce stade, il convient de formuler un certain
At
nombre
this
de
stage, a
remarques
certain number
sur
of
la
comments
gravité,
should be made with regards
ainsi
to
que
the
la dizaine
gravity
de facteurs
and the
personnels et
dozens of
circonstances
aggravating,
entourant
personal
les
and
crimes.
aggravating circumstances surrounding the crimes attributed to him.
Premièrement,
Firstly,
sur le plan numérique,
in
c'est
numerical
toute la
terms,
population
the
de Tombouctou
entire
qui a été
population
ciblée.
of Timbuktu was targeted and found itself
Quand on dit
a
toute la
victim. And when we
population,
say
on parle
the whole
des hommes
population,
et des femmes,
we mean
des
men
personnes
and
âgées
women,
comme des
old and
jeunes,
young,
des adultes comme des enfants.
adults and children.
Deuxièmement,
Secondly,
sur le plan géographique,
at the geographical
les
level,
faits dépassent la seule ville de
the
Tombouctou,
fact
s'étendent à la
that
région
was
de
the
Tombouctou
only town
elle-même.
of Timbuktu, the facts go beyond the town of Timbuktu. They extend to the region of Timbuktu
La
itself.
Chambre a relevé que
The
la police
chamber
opère dans la
noted
région
that the
de Tombouctou,
police operate in the
quittant
Timbuktu
parfois la
region,
ville pour aller en
sometimes
mission,
leaving the
et par
city of
exemple
Timbuktu
arrêter
to
des
go on
personnes.
missions and to arrest people, for example.
La Chambre a vu des
The chamber
rapports
saw a
signés par
police
Al-Hassan
report
concernant
written and signed by
un cas à
Al-Hassan
Gundam, où
about a
un
case
cas
in
avéré
Gundam There's another case in Leri.
Paragraphe
That's in
71.
paragraph 71 of the judgment.
Troisièmement,
Thirdly,
sur le plan temporel,
and in terms of time,
en tenant compte uniquement
taking
de la
into
seule période pour
account
laquelle
only
Hassan
the
a été
period during
actif
which
avec
Al-Hassan was
Al-Qaïda
active with Ansardine and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb,
reconnu coupable,
he was found guilty.
cela correspond à 8
This
mois.
corresponds to 8 months.
Alors c'est vrai, c'est court
And
sur
it's
le
true,
plan
this is
général
short in
de
terms of
l'île
general
Timbuktu,
history of the town of
centenaire et
Timbuktu,
légendaire.
which has
Mais
existed
8
for
mois qu'on est à
hundreds,
Timbuktu,
thousands of years,
à
but
subir tous les jours la répression,
he's
la persécution
always
d'Ansardine
suffered
Al-Qaïda.
repression of acme. If you look at the time it suffered, then this is a long time.
Significatif.
It's a significant amount of
On
time.
ne parle pas de crimes
We're
commis
not
en quelques
speaking
jours,
about
on
crimes
parle de
committed over a few
populations
days.
assujetties pendant
We are
une
not
période
we are talking about an
sans
entire
prévisible,
population
sans
subjugated
horizon,
for a long
sans
period
espoir
with
perceptible.
no foreseeable end, no horizon, no perceptible hope.
Pendant ce temps-là, Al-Assad
During
était
that
la
time,
police de mai
Al-Hassan
2012,
was
agent
in the
de
police from May 2012 to July 2013.
Quatrièmement, au plan
Fourthly,
matériel,
in material terms,
on l'a vu,
what we've
tout le
seen
mode de vie des
is that
Timbuktiens
the entire way of life of the Timbuktu people, all aspects of their daily life, cultural, social and religious, were affected. Festivals, music, dance, traditional dress, traditional and religious practices, and relationships between each other.
Je renvoie au paragraphe
And here I'm referring to paragraphs 1 and 1540 of the judgment. In other words, the individual and collective lives of the people of Timbuktu, the way they live together, their identity, their soul, their history, their traditions,
et même l'économie
and
d'Al-Qaïda,
even the town's economy,
tout cela a
all
été
those
durement
were
affecté.
severely affected.
Et les rapports de police
And the
d'Al-Assad
police
le
reports
reflètent.
signed by Al-Hassan reflect this.
Détention
They
de
touch on
lunettes,
all
relations
these
femmes,
aspects. Possession of amulets, male-female relationships, and smoking.
Paragraphe, par exemple,
And
991 du jugement.
Paragraph 991, for example, in the judgment.
Et permettez-moi un point
Now, if you would allow me to
particulier
address a particular point with regard to women in paragraph 1570 of the judgment, the Chamber writes,
specific rules and prohibitions imposed on women and their enforcement had a significant impact on all aspects of the life of women in Timbuktu. Cinquièmement,
fifthly,
les faits en eux-mêmes étaient graves.
so the facts themselves were serious. I will not be exhaustive. Torture is one of the most serious crimes. Mutilation is obviously serious. Prosecution is serious. That goes without saying.
Sixièmement,
Sixthly,
la population de Tombouctou était sans
the
défense.
population of Timbuktu was defenseless.
C'est une circonstance aggravante.
That's an aggravating
Ils étaient à la merci
circumstance.
d'Ansardine et
They were
d'Akim.
at the mercy of Ansardine and Akim.
Les membres d'Ansardine et
Members of
d'Akim
Ansardine and
exhibaient leurs
Akim were showing off their
armes, je
weapons.
veux dire des armes de
I
guerre.
mean weapons of war.
Les membres de la police islamique,
Members of the Islamic
en
police in
particulier,
particular were
étaient
usually
habituellement
armed
armés de
with
Kalachnikovs.
Kalashnikovs.
Al-Assad
Al-Hassan
lui-même
sometimes himself
arborait parfois
carried
une
a Kalashnikov,
Vous l'avez vu dans certaines
and you
vidéos.
saw it during a video.
De son côté, la
For his
population
part,
n'avait ses mains vides.
for their population, the population had nothing.
La Chambre a
Empty
reconnu
hands.
que
The
la
chamber found that the
population
local
locale
population felt
avait le
that members
sentiment
of
que les membres d'Ansardine et d'Akim
Ansardine and Akim
pouvaient faire ce
could
qu'ils
do
voulaient
whatever they
pour
wanted to
pouvoir,
show their power,
et que eux, les
and that
habitants,
they, the inhabitants,
n'avaient pas d'autre
had no
choix
choice
que de se plier
but to
à la
bow
vision
to their
religieuse
religious vision
qui leur était
imposed
imposée
on
par la
them
force des
by the
armes.
force of arms.
Paragraphe 1540 du jugement. Al-Hassan
Al-Hassan,
est parfaitement conscient.
we are perfectly aware of
Il a
this.
dit lui-même à leur propos,
He
je
said, and here I quote,
il vise les habitants,
and he's referring to the inhabitants here,
ouvrez les guillemets,
open quote,
plus fort qu'eux,
it's stronger than they are. There was nothing they could do.
Alors certes, Al-Hassan
So
rendait
certainly,
des services à tel ou tel.
Al-Hassan sometimes did favors for such and such people. The defense will dwell on that.
Mais à bien les regarder, il
But
s'agissait
on
de
closer
personnes
inspection,
qu'ils connaissaient, comme
These were
les
people they
544
knew,
femmes,
as in the case of witness D0544 and his
comme
wife,
membres de cette
or
tribu ou de sa
for
famille.
members of his tribe or family.
De toute façon, ça montre que
In any
Al-Hassan
case, it shows that Al-Hassan had power.
Je préfère nous
And here I'm
conclure
referring to our
avec
final
là-dessus.
written submissions. I'm not going to go further
Ce qui est
into
certain,
those, but what is certain
c'est que Monsieur Al-Hassan n'a
is that
pas aidé
Mr.
toutes les
Al-Hassan did
victimes
not
de
help all the
violence,
poor
dont
victims of
certaines sont venues
violence,
témoigner devant vous.
some of whom have come to testify before you.
Il les a pas aidés, il en a
He
été
didn't
pour eux.
help them. He, in fact, was their torturer. If you take the women's demonstration on the 6th of October 2012, the women of Timbuktu were protesting against multiple bans imposed on them. As a result, the Islamic police fired into the air, gunfire. They were simply women marching, armed only with their courage. They threw themselves to the ground. The chamber found that at least one woman was physically injured on that day. Several were taken to the governorate. Al-Hassan was also there. When they were allowed to leave, Al-Hassan told them if they wanted to take part in another march, they would be punished. Did Al-Hassan help the women? No, he didn't help the women. So, victims were without defense. And this is my 7th point. Some of the victims were particularly vulnerable. This is, for example, the case of P0565, who was flogged in public with 100 lashes in front of everyone on the 5th of June. I've already referred to her. She was only 14 at the time. You have to imagine the violence this represents for an adolescent girl. Yes, she was particularly vulnerable. And where was Al-Hassan at that time? He was right there, a few meters away. He was participating in securing the area and, while quietly making a phone call. You can see that in the video. Now, Al-Hassan claims that he was there on the orders of the chief of police. There's nothing to prove the existence of such orders, apart from his self-serving statements. Above all, Al-Hassan voluntarily chose to work with Ansar-Din and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. He cannot then complain about taking orders. In any event, the chamber rejected the defense of an order from a superior officer, and here I refer to paragraphs 1782 to 1784 of the judgment. Eighthly, the abuse inflicted was often extremely cruel. And here I refer, among other cases, to that of Madou Traoré in January 2013, who was flogged until he bled. And traces of it can be seen on his T-shirt. And despite that, he had an extreme amount of dignity despite the lashes that were inflicted upon him. And there was also cruel treatment for P0554, flogged, screaming in pain, collapsing to the ground where she continues to be beaten without any pity. So, her dress slips off, exposing her chest. There's no further comment needed. The witness, P0641, said that this disgusted everyone and broke his heart. So you have the scope, territory, victims who are particularly vulnerable, the fact that there was great cruelty. Ninth, another aggravating factor is the long-term effect of the trauma and the impact of the acts he committed, both individually and collectively. Firstly, with regards to the impact on the individual. The chamber, for example, noted the lasting, painful scars on P0554 following his flogging. P0557 described how his own public flogging had affected his relationship with his friends and family, and that it was very difficult. But in terms of the collective impact, the chamber noted that the population of Timbuktu suffered greatly during the control of the city by Ansar-Din and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and that the physical and psychological scars of the acts committed against the local population continue to this day. Indeed, we cannot pretend that these particularly serious acts did not happen or had no impact. So you had victims without defense, particularly vulnerable, cruelty, lasting impact. My 10th point, the acts were committed with a discriminatory motive, namely discrimination on religious grounds. The Timbuktu people were considered by Ansar Dine and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb as bad Muslims. I'm not going to repeat what the Deputy Prosecutor has already said in a perfectly precise and relevant way, and a clear way as well. For his part, Al-Hassan was perfectly aware of the religious motive guiding the action of Ansar Dine and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb in their entire campaign against the inhabitants of Timbuktu. He's comfortable with that. He even claims it. In an interview dated 30th of October 2012 with the Governorate, an interview that he gives, Al-Hassan criticizes people who grew up with a secular upbringing. He calls them enemies of Islam. He also states, the law of the miscreants has been rampant in Mali for 120 years. Now these 120 years are over. We must here apply Islamic law and defend Islamic law to the death. Obviously, when Al-Hassan speaks about Islamic law, we have to understand that he's in fact talking about the particular religious vision adopted by Ansar Dine and Al-Qaeda. Apart from that, what he says speaks for itself without any context, and it demonstrates his knowledge of the discriminatory motives in the system in which he would navigate and participate. And he participates in that in a way, and this is my 11th point. Al-Hassan was showing evident zeal and zealotry, and this is an aggravating circumstance as well. The Chamber found that Al-Hassan was appreciated for his seriousness in implementing the prohibitions and bans. This is in paragraph 1066 of the judgment. This is no mean feat. And I refer to the recital of your judgment, and it's best to cite the source than paraphrase it, and here I quote.
Mr. Al-Hassan was diligent in his duties and praised by his superiors and other leaders of Ansar Dine Hakim, including Abu Zaid. Members of the armed group also praised Mr. Al-Hassan for being tough and enforcing prohibitions. Mr. Al-Hassan was considered to be more effective in putting an end to wrongdoings than Al-Mahdi, the then head of the Hezbollah, who was seen by some of the other members of the armed groups as too lenient when addressing wrongdoing.
And like all diligent work deserves a reward, Al-Hassan did so much, so well that he ended up, as I've already said, at the head of the police. He became a commissioner, head of the police force, around the time of the Battle of Konna. That's in paragraph 552. All this doesn't square with the defence's assertions according to which Al-Hassan was merely following orders that forced him to do so. All of these personal factors and aggravating circumstances, based on facts and testimony and the conclusions of your chamber, are clear. Your Honours, I see that there's approximately 9 minutes to the break. Perhaps this would be a good time to stop my submissions. I can continue, of course, for another 9 minutes, or we can take a break now.
1 moment, Monsieur Tissert. Thank you, Mr. Tissert. Given that it's an appropriate moment for a break, as you say, we can take the break at this point, and we'll return at 20 past 11.
Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Your Honour.
All rise.